Title: A Cup of Tea. The clock on the wall ticked softly in the dimly lit living room. Mrs. Sharma, an elderly widow, sat by the window, her hands trembling slightly as she poured herself a cup of tea. It was a ritual she performed every evening, 2 cups of tea, one for herself and one for her late husband. The second cup always remained untouched, its steam curling into the air and disappearing. Mr. and Mrs. Sharma had been married for 45 years. They were the kind of couple everyone admired. Their laughter filled the small house, and their conversations always lingered late into the night. Every evening, without fail, they sat by the window, sipping tea and sharing stories. But 3 years ago, Mr. Sharma had passed away suddenly. It was a heart attack, the doctor said, quick and unexpected. One moment he was there, smiling at her as he poured her tea, and the next he was gone. Since then, Mrs. Sharma had continued their tea ritual, even though she now sat alone. She never spoke about her grief. Instead, she let it live in the silence, in the empty chair across from her, and in the second cup of tea that no one drank. Her neighbours often offered to visit or take her out for a walk, but she always declined. "I'm fine," she'd say with a faint smile. "I have everything I need here." But everyone in the neighbourhood knew that her small house had grown unbearably quiet. One chilly evening in December, as the first snow began to fall, Mrs. Sharma heard a knock at her door. Surprised, she shuffled to open it and found a boy standing there, no older than 10. He wore a tattered sweater and clutched a small notebook in his hands. "Hello," he said shyly. "I live down the street. My name is Ravi. My mother said I should come by to check on you." Mrs. Sharma hesitated. It had been a long time since anyone had visited her. Finally, she stepped aside and said, "Come in, child. It's too cold to stand out there." Ravi entered, his wide eyes taking in the old but cosy home. "You live here all alone?" he asked innocently. "Yes," Mrs. Sharma replied, her voice soft. "But I'm used to it." Ravi nodded, then held up his notebook. "I'm writing a story for school. It's about people and their favourite things. Can I ask you some questions?" Mrs. Sharma smiled faintly. "All right. What would you like to know?" The boy's face lit up. "What's your favourite thing?" Mrs. Sharma thought for a moment and glanced at the teacups on the table. "Tea," she said simply. "Why tea?" Ravi asked, tilting his head. She hesitated, her eyes lingering on the second cup. "Because it reminds me of someone very dear to me. My husband and I used to have tea together every evening. It was our time." Ravi looked at the untouched cup and then at her. "Do you still miss him?" Mrs. Sharma's throat tightened. She nodded. "Every day." Ravi was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Can I join you for tea?" Mrs. Sharma blinked, startled by the question. She hadn't shared her tea ritual with anyone since her husband's passing, but something in Ravi's earnest gaze softened her heart. "Of course," she said, pouring tea into the second cup. Ravi took the cup with both hands, his small fingers wrapping around the warmth. He sipped it carefully and said, "It's really good. Did your husband make tea like this?" Mrs. Sharma chuckled for the first time in years. "He did, but he always added too much sugar." They sat together, sipping tea and talking. Ravi told her about his school, his friends, and how he loved drawing superheroes in his notebook. Mrs. Sharma listened, her heart feeling lighter with each word. As the evening stretched on, Ravi eventually stood up. "I should go now, or my mother will worry." Mrs. Sharma nodded. "Thank you for visiting. Ravi, you don't know how much it meant to me." The boy grinned. "I'll come back tomorrow. We can have tea again." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Mrs. Sharma alone in her quiet house. But this time, the silence didn't feel so heavy. She looked at the empty cup Ravi had used and smiled softly. For the first time in years, the second cup of tea hadn't gone untouched. From that day on, Ravi visited her every evening. Their tea sessions became the highlight of her day, filling the void left by her husband. Mrs. Sharma never stopped missing him, but she found comfort in the small boy who reminded her that life, even in its sadness, could still hold moments of warmth and connection. And though the second cup of tea was no longer for her husband, it remained a symbol of the love she continued to share with the world, one small act of kindness at a time.